Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. Welcome to another How to Win on DraftKings video. And today I have a very special guest, Peter Jennings, aka CSU Ram 88, one of the founders of FantasyLabs.com, one of the best projection, analysis, lineup builder sites that exists for multiple sports, basically every sport in the daily fantasy industry. He is going to be the one that's going to walk us through how to win using an optimizer in DFS, specifically for NBA. There's a lot of people that are brand new to NBA this season in 2020, 2021, because of all the great work that's being done in advertising and bringing a lot of new people, a lot of new blood into the industry who've gone through their first NFL season. And now they want to know how to transition into NBA. So if that's you, or if you just want a refresher on how to use a lineup optimizer, that's what this video is for. Now, you may not be a really high stakes player. You may not be somebody that makes 150 lineups for the $20 or the $33 or the $44 tournaments. That can get really pricey. But if you play the 5 cent, 10 cent, 25, 50 cent games where you're laying out a lot less money on a daily basis, but still have that opportunity to really explode your bankroll in a positive way, if you bink one of those tournaments on a weekend of NFL or a night of NBA, you're getting in for a lot lower overhead and still have massive upside. And look, a lot of people haven't tried mass multi-entry. They don't know if they can do it, and they're afraid of the fact that some people have 150 lineups entered in tournaments. But what you should be concerning yourself with is, are you the next great MME player and you just haven't found out yet? So using these tools and using the products that they have over at Fantasy Labs, to me, is a great way for you to test that out for a very low entry fee in those mini max games. And they have them every single day in NBA. So a great way to test yourself and find out if it's something that you're good at, even if it's 20 max games. Doesn't matter what it is, it can always help you out. Want to bring Pete in here. Pete, how you doing, man?
Great, Smizz. It's exciting to be with you, and stoked for the Christmas season and the NBA. Probably, actually, I was looking at my results historically. It's been my favorite sport, best sport in terms of money won. And yeah, I think the NBA is in a great place, and it's a great DFS sport.
A lot of people have asked me, right? Like, how come everybody says that NBA is their best sport? Like, a lot of people have sent this to me. I asked for questions of what you want to see in videos to help you get better. And a lot of people who are new are like, oh, well, NBA is my best sport. All right. They hear that a lot of people that are, names that they know in daily fantasy, like, well, NBA is my best sport. One of the reasons that NBA is the best sport for a lot of different people who have played for a lot of years, MLB and NFL are both event sports. Meaning that, like, think about it like the old days on MTV when there was like a rock and jock tournament. There was like a 25-point shot where you could do everything in one take. Same thing for NFL. You catch a 60-yard touchdown on DraftKings, that's 13 points, and it puts you in a better chance to get the 3-point extra bonus. That's a massive change. It's an event. A home run gives you 14 points on DraftKings for a solo shot. There is no 25-point shot in NBA. It's incremental, but you also get way more chances for that player to get to the expectation that you want them to, because there's way more scoring events, 70 plus on both sides of the floor in an NBA game, as opposed to 4 at-bats in baseball, or maybe 10 targets for NFL. So why has NBA been so good to you over the years?
Yeah, I think you just explained it really well, and I think that's what made the NBA so attractive, especially if you're taking it seriously and grinding and working hard, which anyone watching this video is at least interested in improving their process. So yeah, NBA has much shorter term, lower variance because of what you just explained. Mike Trout could play in a baseball game versus, a terrible pitcher and still go over 4. LeBron James is, not every night, but he's basically going to get his 25, 8 and 8, or somewhere around that most nights. So because of that, the NBA is actually the easiest sport to predict, and projections end up, really close to the actual outcomes much more often in the NBA than they do other sports. The NFL, you referenced it, your guy could fall down at the 1-yard line. Maybe there's a holding call in their big play. Those big events are, paramount to your success, and there's obviously more short-term variance. So especially in the early days when the NBA DFS is really inefficient, there's a huge opportunity. And, you hear all the pros, like none of these pros are losing in NBA DFS. And I actually think that is kind of the case. But yeah, going forward, the game's certainly evolving, and you have to work a little bit harder because everyone's getting better. But I still think there's a tremendous opportunity, especially early in the season. And I do think in tournaments, there's a really big opportunity if you strictly focus on that, because there's so much news in NBA. It's really hard to play tournaments well at scale. So I think there's an opportunity there.
Okay, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on different socials and the podcasts you're on and everything else, and then we'll get to the video.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Al. Peter Jennings, obviously, and I go by CSU Ram 88 across the daily fantasy industry, DraftKings, FanDuel. Also on Twitter at CSU Ram 88. Founder of FantasyLabs, which is now part of the Action Network. So I do a lot of content for the Action Network and for FantasyLabs. So check us out. And if you have any questions or any feedback, would love to hear it on Twitter at CSU Ram 88.
Awesome. So as you can see, I've got Fantasy Labs up here. Now, this is just a random slate. I pulled a slate from last season because it's more important. We don't need to talk about a particular slate. I just want to talk about generalities and how we're going to approach doing things using the Fantasy Labs optimizer, whether it's for the single optimizer, one single lineup, the optimal lineup, or we'll get into some rules that you can build. So when you're building tournament lineups for NBA, and we're using the slate from August the 6th, 2020. So if you're a Fantasy Labs subscriber, you can pull this up along with the video while you're watching this and kind of see where we're mousing around as well. If you're not a Fantasy Labs subscriber, you want to check it out, there's a link right down below in the pinned comment. Go check it out, give it a click, support the places that support the channel. So the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at the models, right? So I've got my Smiz Life model. So I've got the things that I've kind of played with around on the edit model button, where I've got the the percent, what's important to you. The question that's been asked is, when you change these things and you play around with the models, does it change the projections? The answer is no. The raw projection will always stay the same, the ceiling and the floor, but it's more how it's grading them. The rating column right here is what that model is changing. So can you talk a little bit about the different models? I'm going to come over here to the pro models. You have Bales, yourself, Cash, Fan, who is the engine behind your projections at Fantasy Labs.
Yeah. So I think that I prefer the Justin Fan model. At the end of the day, initially when we built Fantasy Labs, we really wanted to focus on the rating and putting these different components together. That's still the case, but we're also really focused on projections. You can upload your own projections. You can use ours. There's a variety of different projections you can get around the industry if you wanted that you can upload as well. So it is more projection driven now. But a lot of the things that you would model out on Fantasy Labs end up being baked into the projections as well. So I'm, especially in the NBA, really driven by the projections now, which Justin Fan and our Fantasy Labs NBA team are doing an amazing job at. You can see them on Twitter. It's actually the biggest handle in terms of following within all of the Action Network because we're delivering the news. And
because it's a news aggregator, and news is extremely important when it comes to daily fantasy NBA. It's like it can change right up to lock. And this season, the 2020-2021 season, because teams are going to be allowed in a non-nationally televised game to sit whoever they want for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be, they don't have to make up an injury. Oh, he's got a back spasm today. Oh, he's got a migraine today, he's not going to play. They can just say he's sitting because we want him to sit because rest. And this is the first season that they've really allowed that to be the case. And the league has specified that it's non-televised games. So actually our Discord, Pete, has a bot that has the NBA Fantasy Labs account. Anytime it tweets, it populates in our Discord.
Perfect. I
right
love
in
that.
The NBA channel.
That's amazing. And the news is just so valuable. And I think this year there's going to be more opportunity than ever, to make sure if you're on top of it, that's an edge. And if you're not, it's going to be a real struggle to compete in the NBA. So it's really important to do that. And we're updating the projections in real time, which is extremely valuable. And you can track the news there. So that's the first kind of, foundation to doing this well. You got to know who's playing, you got to know who's out, because, you don't just want to not play the guy who's out, but if a big player's out, that's going to distribute the usage amongst the rest of the team, which is going to change the value of the player. So I'm really focused on projections. In tournaments, there's a variety of things that you can do. It's not as simple as like MLB, where okay, I'm going to stack up a team that I really like today versus, a spot and play the pitchers I like. Or the NFL, where there's easy correlation plays you can make. I mean, we've been talking about this for years, Al, how you want to stack your quarterback, depending on what type of quarterback. If it's, a Derek Carr or Stafford, you probably want to double stack them. Whereas if, it's Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, you can get away with a single stack or even run out a quarterback naked. But, there's all these correlation things that just clearly work and are important. In the NBA, there's less correlations and there's not any clean correlations like there are in baseball and the NFL or hockey. So for me, the first thing I'm doing when I'm looking at the tournament, on a slate for tournaments, is who are the best values? Like which guys do because there's less variance, like you're going to have to eat the chalk quite often. So specifically on this slate, you can see some of these cheap values, Danny Green, Deion Waiters, Kelly Olynyk, Jeremy Grant. Those are really kind of cheapish plays that are going to enable you to get the stars in your lineup. So that's kind of the first thing I'm looking at and determining, which chalk is good chalk and which chalk is bad chalk.
So that's the other thing that we need to touch on is that the word chalk, or a highly played player, highly owned player in tournaments, that differs from sport to sport, right? So in NFL, your threshold for like what somebody being highly owned is like maybe 25 to 35% is high in a tournament in NFL. Maybe 40% is really high in NFL. You have to unlearn everything that you have learned from these other sports when it comes to NBA, because NBA, those numbers, those percent numbers are going to be way higher for all the reasons that we spoke about before. The actual real life are, right? Like when you judge how accurate projections are, they're way more accurate in NBA than any other sport because, as I said, there's more opportunities for these players to score points. So they actually get closer because of the law of large numbers on a night in, night out basis to what their daily projections are. There is still variance involved, but it's not uncommon for a player to be 65, 70% in tournaments. And that's really rare in MLB and NFL. So as Pete says, sometimes you got to eat the chalk because maybe James Harden is going to score 80 points that night and you just can't build a lineup without him.
Right. And you also, I mean, like you talked about, especially on the cheaper end guys, like the only way that a lot of these guys can fail relative to their salary is like an injury or like obscene foul trouble, right?
3 fouls in the first quarter and then they just sit. They don't play the minutes because, as I've said for years, minutes equals money. There's two things that correlate best from real life basketball to daily fantasy basketball. One is your ability to get buckets, right? Scoring points in real life directly translates to scoring fantasy points. The second highest correlation, 1-to-1, between how accurate you're going to be with your projection and in real life, or what they're going to do in real life projecting to fantasy, is minutes played. You need to find guys that are going to play a lot of minutes, and everybody is priced for the minutes that they are projected to play. And as we've said, injuries or players sit or for whatever reason, now somebody else has got to fill those minutes. There are 48 minutes every night at point guard, 48 at shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center. So you got to figure out how those are going to get divvied up. And if a shooting guard who normally plays 35 minutes is out, those are minutes that get to be soaked up by somebody else who's priced as a 10-minute or 12-minute per game player, but is now going to play 22 to 24.
Right. And it's going to change the usage, especially when these superstars guys are out, or a player that, is a primary, focus of the offense. That's going to be distributed amongst these other players. And that's where, when a backup player is all of a sudden thrust into a starting role, and instead of playing, 15 to 18 minutes, is playing 30 minutes, and they're still priced with their salary like they're playing the backup role, they become almost must plays. And that's really the challenging part, because you mentioned it before, like in baseball, if I know someone's going to be 50% owned, it's no matter what, basically a fake.
Yeah.
It's just like, there's so many ways that 50% owned player can fail. And that's almost always the case in the NFL too. I know we've had some weird spots this year, like Taysom Hill on FanDuel ended up being like 97% owned because he's been priced at tight end and he's starting at quarterback. There's exceptions like that, I guess. The backup running back who's been priced in a great matchup. Sometimes that chalk's even good to eat at really high ownership. But for the most part in NFL, I don't want to be playing that many guys that are 40% plus owned or 35% plus owned. I'd rather get leverage somewhere else. So to me, I think, like you said, the NBA is totally different, where you kind of have to throw out those other rules and thought processes that you've been using in the NFL. So yeah, starting with this, you identify some of the guys, and the way I like to build tournament teams off the bat is you find a couple of guys you like. So let's say, we're really high on James Harden here for this day. And I actually think, fading a superstar is really high owned for another superstar is a good one. But let's just say we're going to play James Harden. So you lock James Harden in, and then you run the optimizer for like 10, 20 lineups, and you start seeing who's in the optimal lineup. So when I ran 10, I had a bunch of Kendrick Nunn, James Harden, Ben McLemore. I assume this is a slate where Russell Westbrook wasn't playing. I'm getting a decent amount of all these Lakers. Maybe LeBron's not playing in this game, so some of these other guys are stepping into play. DeAndre Ayton was really starting to come on during this time, and you kind of get a sense of, okay, here are the guys that are in a lot of the optimal lineups based on the projections. Then from there, you need to figure out, okay, who are some guys that I still really like that I'm interested in that I can play instead of some of this chalk, and what do those lineups are looking like? And I think one really interesting thing for tournaments is when there's, a projected blowout. We were talking a little bit about Giannis and Antetokounmpo. A lot of times the Bucks are favored by 14, 15 points, and there's blowout risk. So if you're going to play Giannis, you're going to assume that the game's going to be close and he's going to be playing a bunch of minutes. And if the game's going to be close, that means someone on the other team is going to have to do well, and likely multiple guys. So we were talking about a rule. I don't know if you wanted to show that.
I've got it up on the screen for you.
Yeah, perfect. So this is a perfect example of what you'd want to do. Let's say, Giannis is expected to be much lower owned than Harden. And so you want to get leverage versus the field by going with Giannis. In this event, you want to pair Giannis with his opposing team and increase the ownership of those guys, because you're playing Giannis based on the assumption that the game's going to stay close and he's going to be out there for his usual minutes in a competitive game. So
a lot of what I've done, integrating the Labs Optimizer into like the showdown slates for NFL, if you guys have watched those videos, there are simple position rules that I save as a template. That's easy to do in baseball. That's easy to do in football. It's less easy to do in basketball. I highly recommend you building these slate specific rules into the optimizer. This is the perfect one right here, because there are just less correlations. It's not as simple as, well, every team has a quarterback and that quarterback throws it to wide receivers and tight ends. So stack with one of those and then bring it back with somebody from the other team. You got to kind of sit down and think about the stories that you're trying to tell with your lineups. As Pete just said, if Giannis is in a blowout situation and he's going to be less played, let's say like Luka and Harden were going to be like 50-60% owned on this slate and Giannis was going to be like 15. I want to make sure that the Giannis lineups that I'm building here, if he is viable, because any superstar in the NBA that is a superstar that gets that usage has the possibility of going for like 65 plus points on DraftKings because of the double-double and triple-double bonuses that you get. So we would build in this slate specific rule for that one particular night. So this is the work that you have to do. I've always said you cannot just log into Fantasy Labs, no matter what projections you're using, whether they're the stock projections, you're uploading your own, or from whatever other site that you get them from, and expect to just hit, well, I'm going to build 150, I'm going to plug them into the lineup, and we're going to print money. That's not how this game works. You do have to tell the optimizer what to do. You do have to build the rules for it. So this is one correlation that you're going to build with this lower played stud player that people are avoiding because of the blowout risk, to have at least two or exactly two of the players on the opposing team, because if that team is keeping the game close, Giannis would project to play more minutes, more close to his normal minutes. People are fading because he's going to play maybe 28, 29 in a blowout as opposed to 35, 36. So if that team keeps it close, more fantasy points on the other team. That's why we're building these two rules in. Another correlated rule that I don't think that we can build into the positions column, but again, slate specific for tournaments, would be this year we have Chris Paul, who's not on this slate, unfortunately. Chris Paul, who is now on Phoenix. And if Chris Paul has a really big game as the point guard on a team and has 22 points, 14 assists or whatever, something that's in his wheelhouse, or any high assist percentage point guard, I'm going to want to build a rule that says in lineups that have Chris Paul, include at least one of Booker or Ayton, who would also eat the high bucket getting guys on that team, who would also eat in the case that Chris Paul gets a big game where they're running pick and pop or pick and roll or whatever. Same thing goes for when Harden was playing with Capella. A lot of his assists were off of that high screen and roll where he penetrates and then lobs it up to Capella, who dunks it. And you get the rebound points for Capella as well, double chance for a bonus there, as well as blocks. So those are the type of correlations that we're thinking about. But basketball is more about straight up projections, points per dollar, minutes played is the key. And when you're building your tournament lineups, definitely using the minutes projection and the projected ownership column here to see where you can find some players that are going to be less played when you sort by some of these columns. the projected plus minus and points per salary are two of my favorite things to sort by on Fantasy Labs. So if we sort by projected plus minus, which is a player's plus minus projected points minus their salary expected points. So like if they're expected to score a certain amount of points for their salary, but we project them higher, or Fantasy Labs projects them higher, that player's going to pop in this stat. Then we can look over here as a secondary one at projected ownership. And we come down here, all these guys have 26 to 30, 36 to 40. These are in the teens. Boban that night was only 5 to 8% because he was expected to play 17 or so minutes. One of the best point per minute producers in the league. I have no idea how he did that night, right? But this to me is a great way to find contrarian type plays in the models that you guys have at Fantasy Labs to build your tournament lineups, and maybe put a little flame emoji next to Boban, or two flame emojis.
For the contrarian guys especially, that's a really good way to kind of still build optimal type teams, but then get in the guys that are contrarian. And you hit on so many really good things there, Al. The assist to the shot, 3-point make or whatever, that's really one of the main correlation things that you can get. I mean, the best sequences that you'll have in NBA is when your star player gets like a block and then a dunk and a steal and a score. Like you can get these moments where your guy goes off and gets 10 points in a minute or something like that. Those are the kind of biggest dream scenarios for individual players. But from a correlation standpoint, your best case is when they're passing the ball around a bunch and getting assists, because that's where you can get a really, really nice thing. Chris Paul passes to Booker, he makes a 3. That's 5 fantasy points, which is really big. So that's really smart. That's another thing I like to do. And the point that you keep making that I think is so important too is that every slate is different, and you need to make rules dynamic to the slate. And paying attention to minutes. I love that phrase. It's been used a ton in the daily fantasy industry. Minutes equal money. That is 100% accurate. And that's the key, is figuring out who's going to play night in, night out in the NBA.
And if you needed to remind yourself of that, we now have minutes equals money merch in the store. Click on one of the Teespring shirts down below the screen.
I need to get that shirt.
You got to get that shirt. Wear it when you're making your NBA lineups. We have sweatshirts, zip ups, we got t-shirts, whatever you need to remind yourself every single day that minutes equals money. Pete, thank you for joining us today. Guys, make sure that you click that link for Fantasy Labs. Support the places that support the channel, and look out for another video right here.
He's a legend.